In a quiet rural town called Salem, known for its history of witches and mysteries, a newly arrived family found themselves at the center of a terrifying event. John and Mary Thompson moved to Salem looking for a fresh start after the tragic loss of their youngest son. They bought an old Victorian house, which, despite its beauty, carried an unsettling aura that few in the city mentioned. From the first night in the new house, strange events began to disturb the family. Doors that closed on their own, whispers coming from empty hallways, and a constant feeling of being watched began to affect the couple. Initially, they attributed these events to the stress of moving and grief, but the situation soon became undeniably supernatural. The sounds of heavy footsteps and the echoing of unintelligible voices in the night have become a disturbing routine. Once, Mary found all the kitchen cabinet doors open, with dishes delicately stacked impossibly high. John, a skeptic by nature, began to believe something was terribly wrong when he found messages written in the steam of the bathroom mirror, pleading for help and describing dark details about the house. The intensity and frequency of these events continued to increase, leaving the Thompsons afraid to walk around the house alone. One night, while John was at work, Mary heard heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. Thinking that someone had broken into the house, he took a knife from the kitchen and slowly went upstairs. When he arrived at his deceased son's room, he found the door locked from the inside, something that should never happen, as the lock had been removed after his death. Trembling, she called her husband's name in the hope that it was him playing a bad joke, but only silence responded. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing the empty room. However, the sound of footsteps continued, now echoing behind her. Turning quickly, Mary saw no one, but felt a chill run down her spine. He decided to leave the house and wait for John on the porch, but when he tried to open the front door, it was also locked. It was as if the house itself was trying to imprison her. Mary began to feel a constant pressure on her chest, making it difficult to breathe, and a whispering voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Desperate, she began banging on the windows, trying to get the attention of her neighbors, but it seemed like the outside world couldn't hear her. The situation culminated when she saw the silhouette of a tall, shadowy man at the top of the stairs, watching her with lifeless eyes. Screaming, Mary passed out and woke up hours later, on the living room floor, without remembering exactly how she got there. The next morning, John returned from work to find Mary in a state of shock, sitting on the porch and unable to speak coherently about what had occurred. He decided it was time to get help and called a friend, Peter, who was a local historian and knew the legends of Salem well. Peter told them about a tragedy that had occurred in that house at the end of the 19th century, where an entire family was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The father, supposedly deranged, killed his wife and children before hanging himself. Since then, the house had been abandoned until it was purchased by the Thompsons. Intrigued and concerned, Peter suggested they call a paranormal investigator to check out the house. Reluctantly, but with no other options, the Thompsons agreed. Peter began sharing reports from other Salem residents who avoided passing by the house, telling of sightings of ghostly figures in the windows and sounds of crying and screaming in the night. He mentioned that several former owners tried to sell the house quickly, all claiming to feel an evil presence. The more Peter told, the more the Thompsons realized that the events they were experiencing were not unique, but part of an ancient and terrible pattern. Mary, still traumatized, agreed that bringing in a specialist was the only way to understand what was happening. The investigator, a man named Richard, arrived with sophisticated equipment and a team of assistants. From the moment he entered the house, Richard felt a heavy, oppressive presence. Using night vision cameras, audio recorders, and motion sensors, the team began exploring each room. In the son's room, sensors detected an abrupt drop in temperature and picked up the sound of footsteps, even though no one was physically present. In one of the audio recordings, they clearly heard the voice of a child asking for help, a sound that left everyone present with goosebumps. During the investigation, Richard discovered a secret room behind a bookcase in the basement, containing strange symbols and objects used in occult rituals. This finding reinforced the theory that the house was under a strong evil influence. The team also captured several nebulous shapes on their cameras, figures that seemed to move through the shadows and disappear instantly. The windows closed tightly on their own, and a sense of dread spread through the group as they progressed in the investigation. Richard explained to the Thompsons that the presence in the house was not just a restless spirit, but something much older and more dangerous. He mentioned that some of the entities that inhabited the house could have been summoned during the rituals that had been performed there, and were now trapped between the worlds, seeking release or revenge. As the investigation continued, paranormal activity intensified. Mary began to have disturbing visions of her deceased son, who seemed to be trying to warn her of imminent danger. John, in turn, felt increasingly isolated and paranoid, hearing voices urging him to do terrible things. One night, while reviewing footage, the team captured a dark shadow moving quickly through the hallways, followed by an agonized scream that echoed throughout the house. This was the breaking point for the family. Richard advised the Thompsons to leave the house immediately, but they were reluctant to leave without trying to solve the mystery. They began to notice that the entities seemed to respond to certain stimuli, such as the presence of their deceased son's personal objects, which intensified the manifestations. One night, John woke up to the feeling of invisible hands trying to strangle him, while Mary saw the reflection of a shadowy figure in the bathroom mirror. Desperate, they began spending nights away from home, but this only seemed to enrage the spirits even more. Tension between John and Mary was also rising, with each feeling they were on the verge of a breakdown. The constant fear and disturbing experiences were destroying what was left of his sanity. They decided to perform one last spiritual cleansing ritual, with the hope of freeing the trapped souls and bringing peace to the place. Gathered in the main room, they lit candles and began to recite ancient prayers. At the height of the ritual, an invisible force attacked violently, extinguishing the candles and sending objects flying. Mary was thrown against the wall, while John felt cold hands around his neck, choking him. Richard and his team struggled to remain calm and continue the ritual. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room, and the figure of a man appeared briefly, before disappearing with a scream of agony. When the light dissipated, silence returned and the house became surprisingly calm. The exhausted and frightened investigation team did one last sweep of the house, confirming that the oppressive presence appeared to have disappeared. John and Mary hugged each other, relieved but deeply shaken by what they had just experienced. The house, now silent, seemed to have finally found peace, but the trauma of what happened left indelible marks on everyone involved. Richard, despite being an experienced professional, admitted that he had never faced something so powerful and evil before, and warned the Thompsons to remain alert, as entities of this nature can leave traces even after a cleansing ritual. The Thompsons left Salem shortly after, unable to continue living in the house that nearly destroyed them. The story spread throughout the city, and many believed that the family had been targeted by an ancient and powerful evil force. John and Mary never spoke publicly about the events again, but they both bore the scars of that terrible episode. The house in Salem was abandoned again, its dark past forgotten by time, but for those who knew the true story, It would forever remain a place of unspeakable terror, where the shadows of the past still haunted the halls and the whispers of lost souls could be heard on the darkest nights. John and Mary tried to rebuild their lives in another town, but the memory of what happened in Salem followed them like a shadow.